Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at learning,
Uh-huh.
specifically classical and operant conditioning.
Okay.
And we're using this psychology textbook that you brought with you.
Yes,
We're going to really try to unpack this and kind of give our listeners a deep dive
absolutely.
into the science of learning.
Yeah, it's like we're detectives. We're
Yeah.
going to uncover
I like
the
them.
hidden mechanisms
Yeah.
that are, kind of behind all of our behavior.
Yeah, so before we get into all the details and stuff,
Yeah.
what exactly is learning and why is it so important?
Well, learning, you know, at its most basic level, it's acquiring new information or behaviors
Okay.
through our experiences. But it's not just about memorizing facts and figures.
Right.
It's about how those experiences actually change our brains and shape our responses to
I
the
see,
world
yeah.
around us.
Right.
If you think about it this way, learning allows us to adapt,
Right.
to survive, and to thrive in a world that's constantly changing.
Yeah, I mean, this textbook talks about it as being the cornerstone of adaptability.
Uh-huh.
And, it makes sense for human, but it also makes sense for, animals in general, too.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you take like a very basic organism, like a sea slug,
Okay.
even these seemingly simple creatures can learn to associate a certain stimulus with a particular outcome.
Okay.
They can learn to avoid a certain area if they've encountered a predator there.
Oh, so they're already making those connections
Exactly.
and adjusting their behavior based on what's happened to them in the past.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So this textbook also talks about associative learning,
Yes.
and they use the example of associating the smell of fresh bread
Oh, yeah.
with the experience of eating it and how satisfying that is.
Right. Our brains are actually wired to connect events that happen in a sequence.
Okay.
So it's almost like our minds are constantly creating these if-then scenarios.
Okay.
If I smell bread, then I can expect a delicious treat.
And those could be pretty subtle.
Oh, incredibly subtle.
There was this one study that I was reading about that had to do with red pens.
Oh, the red pen study.
Yeah. Tell me about this.
It's a classic. Researchers had, students write essays, and some of the essays were graded with red pens and some were graded with black pens.
Okay.
And consistently, the ones that were graded with red pens received lower marks.
Oh, wow.
So it seems that the color red, which is often associated with, errors and corrections, actually primes the graders to be more critical.
Wow. I mean, I never would have thought about that.
Yeah.
The color of the pen could make such a difference.
It's amazing how these little things can really influence our perception and our judgment.
Yeah, it really highlights how much is going on behind the scenes that we don't realize.
Absolutely.
Our brains are constantly making these associations
We're constantly.
that we're not even aware of.
It's true. And, it doesn't have to be just these one-time events.
Okay.
I mean, think about your daily routine. You know that cup of coffee you always reach for in the morning?
Yeah.
The way you automatically check your phone when you hear a notification?
Oh, yeah.
These are habits that are formed through associating these actions with particular rewards and contexts.
I've been trying to break my doom scrolling habit
Oh, yeah.
before I go to bed, but
It's tough.
I can't stop. It's I just pick up my phone and I'm scrolling and scrolling.
I know, it's like we're on autopilot sometimes.
Totally.
It's hard to break those habits,
Yeah.
but understanding how they form is the first step,
Okay.
And they say on average it takes about 66 days
Oh, wow.
to form a new habit.
Okay.
So consistency is key. But before we jump ahead,
Okay.
get into the nitty-gritty of habit formation,
Yeah.
let's explore another kind of interesting concept, habituation.
Okay. What's habituation?
Well, habituation is essentially about getting used to something.
Okay.
It's like the decreased responsiveness that we have to a stimulus after repeated exposure to it. Think about if you live near a busy street.
Yeah.
At first, that traffic noise might be incredibly distracting, but over time,
You just kind of tune it out?
you don't even notice it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like our brains are learning to filter out that irrelevant information.
Interesting.
It's really a form of learning that helps us to focus on what's important
Yeah.
and avoid that sensory overload.
Okay.
But it's important to distinguish habituation from sensory adaptation.
Oh, okay. What's the difference?
So while both of them involve a decrease in our response to a stimulus, sensory adaptation is happening at the level of the sensory receptors,
Okay.
whereas habituation is happening in the brain.
Oh, so it's the difference between my eyes adjusting to a dark room
Exact.
versus my brain just learning to ignore the sound of a clock ticking or something.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
So we've talked about associative learning.
Yes.
We've talked about habituation. These are two ways that our brains are learning from experience.
Yes.
But now let's get to the big leagues.
Okay.
Classical conditioning.
All right.
Classical conditioning.
Yeah, the foundation of so much of our learned behavior.
And it all started with those drooling dogs.
Pavlov and his dogs.
I mean, everyone's heard about Pavlov's dogs.
Right.
But can you walk me through that experiment?
Absolutely. So imagine you have a dog,
Yeah.
you have a bell, and you have some delicious food.
Okay.
Now, initially, the bell is just a neutral stimulus. It doesn't mean anything to the dog.
Okay.
The food, however, is what we call an unconditioned stimulus.
Okay. Why is it unconditioned?
It's unconditioned because it naturally triggers a response salivation
Okay.
without any prior learning.
So the dog sees food, the dog drools.
The dog sees food, the dog drools.
Okay.
That's the unconditioned response.
Uh,
It's a reflex, an automatic reaction to something that's biologically significant.
okay, so food equals drool.
Food equals drool, exactly.
Got it. But where does the bell come in?
Here's where the magic happens. Pavlov repeatedly paired the sound of the bell
Okay.
with the presentation of the food.
Yeah.
So over time, the dog learned to associate that bell with the food that was about to arrive.
So the dog's like, oh, bell means food's coming.
Exactly. And that's when the bell becomes what we call a conditioned stimulus.
Okay.
So now just the sound of the bell alone, without even presenting the food,
Oh, wow.
will trigger the dog to salivate.
So the dog is like predicting that the bell means food is coming
Precise.
and starts drooling.
You got it.
Oh, that's so wild.
This is the essence of classical conditioning.
Oh, yeah.
It's learning to associate a previously neutral stimulus with a meaningful one and then responding accordingly.
This is amazing. So, like, once the dog learns this association,
Yeah.
does it just keep drooling every time it hears a bell, like, forever?
That's a great question. And that leads us to another fascinating concept, extinction.
Okay.
So let's say you keep ringing that bell,
Okay.
but you stop giving the dog the food. Over time, that conditioned response, that drooling, is going to start to diminish.
Okay.
The association weakens
Yeah.
because the bell is no longer a reliable predictor of the food.
Okay.
Like, oh, I hear the bell, but I'm not getting any food anymore. What's the point?
So it's like the learned response just fades away.
It fades away.
Okay.
But here's where things get even more interesting. Let's say you bring that bell back after a while.
Okay.
Guess what? There's a good chance that the dog will start salivating again.
Really?
It's called spontaneous recovery.
Oh, wow.
It's like the brain retains a little trace of that learned association,
Interesting.
and it can resurface
Okay.
under the right conditions.
So our brains are forming these connections, weakening them,
Yes,
and then even sometimes reviving them
exactly.
based on our experiences.
It's incredible.
That's so cool.
It is, and this process of learning and unlearning is
Yeah.
further shaped by two other important concepts:
Okay.
generalization and discrimination.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What are those?
Well, generalization is about responding
Yeah.
to stimuli that are similar to that conditioned stimulus.
Okay.
So if the dog was conditioned to salivate to a specific bell tone, it might also salivate to a slightly different tone.
So it's like it broadens it.
Yeah. It broadens it.
Sure, other similar thing.
It's like if you develop a taste aversion to a particular food
Yeah.
after getting food poisoning, you might avoid any food that looks or smells similar.
Well, yeah, I've totally done that.
We've all been there.
It's like my brain's just playing it safe.
Right.
Just in case. But what about discrimination? What's that?
Discrimination is the opposite of generalization.
Okay.
It's about learning to distinguish
Okay.
between the conditioned stimulus and other irrelevant stimuli.
Okay.
And it allows us to fine-tune our responses and avoid those unnecessary reactions.
So it's about being more specific
Yes.
with our learned responses.
Exactly. So, for instance, imagine someone who loves their grandma's homemade chocolate chip cookies.
Yep.
The smell of those cookies baking might trigger this warm feeling of anticipation and joy, but they can still discriminate
Yeah.
between the smell of their grandma's cookies and the smell of store-bought cookies,
Right.
even though they're both chocolate chip.
Yeah.
So it's about recognizing the nuances and
Yeah.
making more precise associations.
This is fascinating. I'm starting to see how, like, classical conditioning is woven into so many aspects of our lives.
It is, but before we move on to explore operant conditioning and its equally fascinating mechanisms,
Okay.
let's pause here for a moment. Just let these insights kind of sink in a little bit.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
I'm ready to see where this deep dive takes us next.
Me too. Welcome back. So now that we've explored classical conditioning, let's shift gears and delve into operant conditioning.
Okay, I'm ready. Operant conditioning. So it's all about rewards and punishments, right? But I always get a little confused
Yeah.
about, like, what's the difference between classical and operant?
Sure, they can seem similar on the surface, but there is a key distinction.
Okay.
Classical conditioning focuses on those automatic responses to stimuli, you know?
Right, like that drooling dog we were talking about.
Exactly. Operant conditioning is all about learning.
Okay.
Through the consequences of our actions.
Okay.
It's about those voluntary behaviors that we choose to engage in.
So it's about how our actions shape our future behavior based on what happens afterwards.
Exactly. Imagine a child learning to ride a bike.
Okay.
At first, they're going to wobble, they're going to fall a few times.
Right.
But each time they manage to stay upright and pedal, that brings a sense of accomplishment and maybe even some cheers from their parents.
Yeah.
So those positive consequences reinforce the behavior, making it more likely that they'll keep practicing and eventually master that skill.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's not just about those like external rewards,
Right.
like the cheers or whatever it could also be, about like the internal satisfaction that you get from like achieving something.
Yeah, think about that feeling of satisfaction you get after completing a challenging workout.
Well, yeah.
Or finally finishing that project you've been putting off.
Yeah.
Those internal rewards can be powerful motivators.
Yeah, totally. So who are some of the pioneers in this field of operant conditioning?
Well, it all started with a guy named Edward Thorndike.
Okay.
And his law of effect.
Okay.
And he observed that behaviors followed by favorable consequences become more likely.
Okay.
And behaviors followed by unfavorable consequences become less likely.
Yeah, it's like common sense almost, but I guess he like backed it up with actual science.
Exactly. But it was B.F. Skinner who really kind of systematized and expanded upon these ideas.
Okay.
He developed operant conditioning into a comprehensive theory and designed a special apparatus to study it.
Oh, yeah, the Skinner box.
The Skinner box.
I remember learning about that.
So the Skinner box is basically this little chamber where a rat can press a lever to get food pellets. And it allowed researchers to carefully control the environment and study how animals learn through reinforcement.
Okay.
They could manipulate the consequences of those actions by either delivering or withholding food.
Okay.
And then they could observe how that influenced the rat's behavior.
So it's about like manipulating those consequences to shape the behavior.
Exactly. And that brings us to the concept of reinforcement.
Okay.
Reinforcement is anything that strengthens the behavior it follows, making it more likely to occur again.
So reinforcement equals increasing a behavior?
Yes.
But I know there are different types, right?
Yes.
Like positive and negative reinforcement.
Exactly. So positive reinforcement is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
It's about adding something pleasant.
Okay.
To increase the likelihood of that behavior.
So like giving a dog a treat for sitting on command?
Exactly.
Or like praising a child for sharing their toys?
That's it.
Okay, that makes sense. But negative reinforcement is where I always get tripped up.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it should be about punishment.
It does. It does.
But I know it's not.
Right. And you're right to be cautious because it is often misunderstood.
Okay.
So remember, reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, is always about increasing a behavior.
Right.
Negative reinforcement involves removing something unpleasant to strengthen a response.
Okay, so it's not about like punishing bad behavior. It's about rewarding good behavior by taking away something unpleasant.
Exactly. Think about taking an aspirin for a headache.
Okay.
You're engaging in the behavior of taking that medication.
Right.
Because it removes that unpleasant headache pain.
Or like fastening your seatbelt to make that annoying beeping sound stop.
Oh,
I'm totally guilty of that.
we've all been there.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of negative reinforcement.
Okay.
That beeping is the unpleasant stimulus.
Right.
And fastening your seatbelt is the behavior that removed it.
Yeah.
Thus reinforcing the act of buckling up.
This is making a lot more sense now. So we've got positive and negative reinforcement. Are there any other important distinctions when it comes to reinforcers?
Absolutely. We can also distinguish between what we call primary reinforcers and conditioned reinforcers.
Okay, go to those.
So primary reinforcers are inherently satisfying, like food when you're hungry or relief from pain.
Okay.
They don't require any learning to be effective.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Conditioned reinforcers, on the other hand, acquire their power through their association with those primary reinforcers.
Yeah, can you give me an example?
Sure, think about money.
Okay.
It's not inherently rewarding.
Yeah.
It's just paper or metal.
Right.
But we've learned to associate it with the things we can buy with it.
Right.
food, shelter, entertainment, all those primary reinforcers.
Okay, so it's like those gold stars we used to get in elementary school.
Exactly.
The stars themselves weren't like the reward.
Right.
But it's what they represented.
Exactly.
So like the praise from the teacher or that sense of accomplishment.
That's it. Those gold stars were a conditioned reinforcer.
Okay.
That derived their power from their association with those primary reinforcers like praise and recognition.
Okay, and then there's also this idea of like timing.
Yes, the timing of reinforcement is crucial.
Yeah.
We have immediate reinforcers and delayed reinforcers.
Oh yeah, this is where my self-control goes out the window.
I know.
It's all about that instant gratification.
We all struggle with that, but, the ability to delay gratification and work towards those long-term goals is really a hallmark of maturity and self-discipline.
I mean, that's true.
So think about saving for retirement.
Yeah.
Or studying hard to get that good grade at the end of the semester.
Right. Those are
examples of delayed reinforcers.
Yeah, but sometimes it's so hard to resist that instant reward.
It is.
Even if it means like sacrificing something bigger in the future.
It's constant battle.
Yeah, like choosing to like binge watch my favorite show instead of getting a head start on that big work project that's due.
Yeah, I hear you. It's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
But, understanding the power of delayed gratification can help us make those more mindful choices.
Yeah, for sure. So now another key concept in operant conditioning is reinforcement schedules.
Reinforcement schedules.
What are those?
So it's all about how often a desired behavior is reinforced.
Okay.
And, in real life, rewards are rarely consistent and predictable.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't get a paycheck every time we complete a task.
Right.
Or win the lottery every time we buy a ticket.
If only.
Right. Well, different reinforcement schedules actually lead to different patterns of learning and extinction.
Okay.
So let's start with what we call fixed ratio schedules.
Okay. Hit me with it.
All right. So fixed ratio schedules involve reinforcing a behavior after a set number of responses.
Okay.
So think about a coffee shop rewards program.
Okay.
Buy 10 coffees, get one free.
Yeah.
That's a classic fixed ratio schedule.
Okay. That's pretty easy to understand.
Yeah, and then you have variable ratio schedules.
Okay.
Which are a bit more unpredictable.
Okay.
They involve reinforcing a behavior after an unpredictable number of responses.
Okay.
And this is where things get a little more interesting and potentially addictive.
Okay. I'm sensing a story here.
So think about slot machines.
Oh, yeah.
You never know exactly when you're going to win.
Right.
But the possibility of hitting that jackpot keeps you pulling that lever.
Yeah.
That's the power of a variable ratio schedule.
That's why gambling can be so addictive.
Exactly.
It's like you're always hoping for that next win.
Yes.
Even if it rarely comes.
And that unpredictability makes it very effective at maintaining behavior.
Wow. So it's all about playing on our, like, anticipation and desire for that reward.
Yes.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we talked about ratios. What about intervals?
Good question. So fixed interval schedules involve reinforcing the first response after a fixed time period. So imagine checking your mailbox every day at the same time because, the mail usually arrives around then.
Right.
That's a fixed interval schedule in action.
So it's all about the time rather than the responses?
Exactly. Like waiting for that cookie to bake.
Yeah.
Even though staring into the oven won't make it bake any faster.
Exactly.
You got it.
Okay.
And finally, we have variable interval schedules.
Okay.
Where the reinforcement comes after varying time intervals.
Okay.
Think about checking your email.
Oh, yeah.
You never know exactly when you're going to get a new message.
Right.
But you keep checking periodically throughout the day.
Oh, the constant refresh.
Exactly.
Especially when I'm like waiting for something important.
We all do it.
Yeah.
And that's how those variable interval schedules work.
Okay.
They keep us engaged and checking back even if the reinforcement is unpredictable.
This is all so insightful.
Good.
But what about like the other side of the coin?
Yeah.
What about punishment?
Punishment.
How does that fit into all of this?
That's an important question, and it's crucial to distinguish punishment from negative reinforcement.
Okay.
Even though they both involve something unpleasant.
Yeah.
Remember, negative reinforcement increases a behavior.
Right, by taking away something bad.
Right, by removing something aversive.
Okay.
Punishment, on the other hand, is all about decreasing a behavior.
Okay.
It involves either administering something unpleasant, like a scolding or a parking ticket,
Right.
or removing something pleasant, like taking away a teenager's phone privileges.
Okay, so it's about consequences that make a behavior less likely to occur.
Precisely. Now, there's been a lot of debate about the effectiveness of punishment, especially physical punishment.
Yeah, I can see why that would be controversial.
Uh-huh.
It seems like there could be some unintended consequences there.
Right. And while punishment might suppress a behavior temporarily, it doesn't necessarily teach the individual what to do instead.
Right.
It can also lead to fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
And even aggression.
So it's more about encouraging and rewarding those positive behaviors than it is about punishing the negative ones.
Exactly. So instead of focusing on what not to do,
it's
better to encourage and reward those positive behaviors.
Like teaching a dog a new trick.
Yeah.
By giving them treats when they get it right.
Right.
Rather than like scolding them when they make a mistake.
Exactly. Many psychologists believe that positive reinforcement and redirection are more effective and more humane ways of shaping behavior.
This has been eye-opening.
Good.
But before we jump into how all of these learning principles play out in our daily lives, let's just take a minute to kind of reflect on what we've learned so far.
Sounds good. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic principles of operant conditioning to the nuances of those reinforcement schedules.
For sure. Okay, so we're back and ready to like connect these dots between what we've learned about classical and operant conditioning and the real world.
Yeah. It's pretty remarkable how these principles are at work all around us. Yeah.
Often without us even realizing it.
That's what makes it so fascinating to me. It's like we're like uncovering these hidden forces that shape our thoughts, our feelings, our actions.
Absolutely. So why don't we start with a domain where learning is absolutely paramount. Education.
Makes sense. I mean, schools are all about learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, remember B.F. Skinner's vision of individualized learning with that immediate feedback.
Yeah.
You know, he really believed that the traditional classroom setting with its kind of one-size-fits-all approach wasn't really the most effective way to learn.
It's like he was ahead of his time.
He was. And in many ways, technology is now making his vision a reality.
How so?
Well, think about online learning platforms. Adaptive quizzing programs.
Yeah.
You know, they can tailor the pace and the content of learning to each student's individual needs and provide that instant feedback on their progress.
It's like having a personal tutor for every subject. It is. And these platforms are using operant conditioning principles. You know, by breaking down those complex subjects into smaller chunks. Providing immediate reinforcement for those correct answers and allowing students to progress at their own pace.
That makes me think about, like, the gamification of learning.
Oh, yeah.
That's become so popular. All these apps and programs that use, like, points and badges and rewards.
Exactly.
To kind of motivate users.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Gamification is really leveraging operant conditioning by tapping into our natural desire for those rewards and recognition.
Right. It makes it more fun.
It does. Makes it more engaging.
So speaking of fun, how about applications of this in sports?
Oh, sports is a great example.
Yeah.
Operant conditioning is used extensively in sports. Coaches use what we call shaping techniques to gradually build skills, you know, starting with those small successes and progressively increasing the challenge. Think about teaching someone to swing a golf club. Or hit a baseball. You wouldn't start with the most difficult shot right away.
Small steps lead to big wins.
Exactly. Rome wasn't built in a day.
It's true. This also makes me think about, like, those athletes who have lucky socks or, like, pre-game rituals.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Are those related to operant conditioning?
Remember those accidental timings of rewards we talked about?
Yeah.
That's where superstitions come in.
Okay.
So if a particular action just happens to precede a successful outcome, even if it's completely unrelated, it can be reinforced and become part of that athlete's routine.
So their brain's like making a connection even though it's not really there.
Exactly. And these superstitions can be surprisingly powerful in boosting an athlete's confidence and performance.
Yeah, it's like a placebo effect, but for behavior.
Exactly.
That's wild. Okay, so it's not just athletes.
Right.
I mean, we all have our little superstitions.
We all do.
I confess I have a lucky pen that I always use for exams. Okay, let's move on. How about the workplace?
The workplace.
How can we apply these operant conditioning principles there?
Well, it's all about creating a work environment that really encourages and rewards those desired behaviors. So, you know, clear expectations, achievable goals, and positive reinforcement for a job well done can really boost productivity and morale.
So it's not just about like dangling carrots and wielding sticks.
Not at all.
Okay.
It's about recognizing and appreciating good work. Providing that constructive feedback and fostering a culture of positive reinforcement.
That sounds like a really nice place to work.
It does.
Okay, what about like closer to home? How can parents use these principles effectively?
Parenting is like a prime example of operant conditioning in action.
Okay.
Whether we realize it or not, the key is consistency and understanding the impact of our responses to our children's behaviors.
So like giving into a tantrum. Even occasionally can actually reinforce that behavior.
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, no.
It's all about those reinforcement schedules we talked about. That intermittent reinforcement, even if it's unintentional, can be very powerful in maintaining that behavior.
It's like those pigeons pecking away at the key.
Exactly.
Even when they don't know if a reward's coming.
That's it. But remember, the good news is positive reinforcement is just as powerful.
Okay.
Praising good behavior, setting clear expectations, and offering those appropriate rewards can work wonders.
Hey, this is great advice. So what about like shaping our own behavior?
Oh, absolutely.
Can we use this for self-improvement?
We can be our own personal trainer, so to speak. The key is to set those realistic goals, break them down into smaller steps, track our progress, and reward ourselves along the way.
So it's like we're the rat in the Skinner box. And the lever is like our desired behavior.
Exactly.
Right.
And just like with any training program, consistency and patience are crucial.
This has been an amazing deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
But before we wrap things up, I want to kind of like circle back to one of the key points. What are like the main differences between classical and operant conditioning?
Right, because I want to make sure I can keep them straight. That's a great question. So remember classical conditioning. It's about associating those stimuli that we don't control and responding automatically. Think Pavlov's dogs and those salivating responses.
Right. So classical conditioning is involuntary.
Exactly.
Operant is voluntary.
Operant conditioning is about associating our own voluntary actions with their consequences. So think Skinner's rats. And those lever-pressing behaviors.
Okay, so classical is involuntary, operant is voluntary.
You got it.
Got it. And both types involve those processes of acquisition and extinction. Spontaneous recovery, generalization, and discrimination.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to me how these like seemingly simple principles can have such a profound impact on our lives.
It is, and the takeaway message here is that these learning principles are at work all around us, shaping our behaviors and our experiences in countless ways.
I totally agree with that. So listeners, as you go about your day, pay attention to how these principles might be at play in your own life. Think about the habits you form, the rewards you seek, the consequences that shape your choices.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, think about what you want to learn and how you can use these insights to optimize your own learning journey.
That's a great point.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of learning.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those brains engaged.
Yes.
And keep exploring.
Absolutely.